Hello, welcome to night 3 of Run for Something's Front Row Seat series. It's going to be a really fun conversation about women's health, about reproductive justice, about what's going on in states and cities across the country. And I am really thrilled about the women that we have brought to the event tonight. Hi, Chelsea from Pasadena, one of the incredible Run for Something volunteers, Emily from Pennsylvania. So nice to have you all. Let's get started. My name is Amanda Littman. I am one of the co-founders and the executive director of Run for Something. This is, as I said up top, night 3 of our Front Row Seat series, and a series of events that we started in, I guess, right around this time last year when we were like, what does one do during a pandemic? How does one continue to build a community? And they have been really fun. So we decided to do them again this time around and bring together some of the best folks across the country to have really interesting conversations about topics that are important to the Run for Something mission. For those of you who are new to Run for Something, a very brief overview. Run for Something recruits and supports young, diverse progressives running for local office all across the country. We launched in January 2017, right on Inauguration Day, thinking it would be really small. We thought maybe we'd get 100 people in the first year. Instead, more than 1,000 people signed up in the first week. And as of today, more than 76,000 people all across the country have raised their hands to tell us they want to run for office. We've endorsed more than 1,600 and elected 499 across 46 states, 56% women, 55% people of color, 24% LGBTQ+, I believe. They are amazing. You're going to meet some of our alumni tonight. If you've been with us for other events, you know exactly how incredible these folks are. They are not just rising stars, they are the now stars. They are the leaders of the Democratic Party and in their communities. You know, Run for Something only works with candidates, first-time candidates running for a state house, state senate, school board, library board, city council, water board, and everything in between to make sure that on the offices that are really critical to the issues that we care about, we have really good people in the room. We are able to put together these events because of our amazing host committee. So before we get started, I want to thank every member of our national host committee, as well as our sponsors, which include Authentic Campaigns, Planned Parenthood, Precision Strategies, Civis Analytics, and NewCo, a really great group of organizations that support the Run for Something mission, and we're really grateful for them. I'm only going to ask you twice tonight, once up top and once at the end. If you are inspired by what we're doing, if you're inspired this evening, it would mean a lot to us if you're able to make another donation. Members from our team will be dropping links in the chat throughout the evening, but if you just go to runforsomething.net/build, every dollar means the world to our mission. You know, we have done all that we have done, those 499 elected officials across the country, spending less than $3 million per year, barely. So every dollar means the world to our effort, and whatever you can do goes a long way. I'm really excited for tonight's conversation. If you have any questions for me, or more importantly, for our amazing panelists, please do drop them in either the Q&A or the chat, and I will bubble them up from there. We'll have space either throughout the conversation as well as at the end. So don't wait. If you have something on your mind that you want to ask, please do drop it in there. I'm going to give you a little introduction on our 4 panelists, then have them come up, start with a little icebreaker, and then we'll get to the topic at hand. We are joined by 4 amazing women this evening. First up is North Carolina State Senator Sydney Batch, who is a true advocate for the people of Wake County. For over a decade, Sydney has served as a family law attorney, a child welfare advocate, and a social worker. She has fought every day for families across Wake County that are facing difficult choices and increasing uncertainty about their futures. She was elected to serve the people of Wake County in 2018 when she entered the state house. She sponsored and co-sponsored 48 bills during the 2019-2020 legislative session, ranging from stuff around affordable health care to things to ensure clean drinking water for all North Carolinians. She was later appointed after she ran for re-election, came up just a hair short, was appointed in January 2021 to the North Carolina State Senate. She has continued to advocate for the people of Wake County and North Carolina. Sydney is phenomenal, and we are so glad to have her this evening. We're also joined by State Representative Anna Eskamani from Florida. Anna is a lifelong Orlando native and daughter of immigrants who has worked relentlessly her entire life to protect all members of her community. Anna is a community organizer with a proven track record. She was also previously a staffer at Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida. She flipped a state legislative seat red to blue in 2018, just outside Orlando, and won her re-election by an overwhelming majority in 2020. She made history as the first Iranian American elected to any public office in Florida, and has championed critical issues like economic justice, environmental protection, equality for all, funding for public schools, and support for arts and culture. She has also made her name for herself over the last year by her and her office single-handedly helping more than 30,000 Floridians deal with unemployment issues. Anna is a fighter. She is a rising star in the Democratic Party in Florida, and we're so glad to have her. Our third guest this evening is Cecile Richards, co-chair of American Bridge, former president of Planned Parenthood, and former co-founder of Supermajority. Cecile Richards has been an activist since she took the principal's office in 7th grade for wearing an armband in protest of the Vietnam War. She grew up in very conservative Texas, where her civil rights attorney father and activist mother taught their kids to be troublemakers. Her mom transformed from a housewife into an electrifying force in the Democratic Party, who made a name for herself as the straight-talking, truth-telling governor of Texas. Cecile worked as a labor organizer alongside women earning minimum wage, and after years of advocacy, resistance, and progressive leadership, she has been a remarkable leader for women. Her time at Planned Parenthood was transformative for healthcare, especially for women and women identifying folks across the country, and her perspective here is invaluable. So we're so glad to have her tonight. Finally, we have one of my Don't Tell Anyone favorite members of Congress, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, who serves Illinois' 14th Congressional District. She was sworn in 2019. Congresswoman Underwood is the first woman, the first person of color, and the first millennial to represent her community in Congress. She's also the youngest African-American woman to serve in the House. She serves on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and the House Committee on Appropriations. She co-founded and co-chairs the Black Maternal Health Caucus, which elevates the Black maternal health crisis within Congress and advances policy solutions accordingly. Prior to her election to Congress, Congresswoman Underwood worked with a Medicaid plan in Chicago to ensure it provided high quality, cost-efficient care. She served as a senior advisor for HHS. She worked as a nurse. She helped implement the Affordable Care Act at HHS. She taught nurse practitioners through Georgetown's online master's program. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan and Johns Hopkins. She lives in Naperville. She's a lifelong Girl Scout. She's a rock star. Lauren is the exact kind of leader we need more of, both in Congress and across the country. With that, I'm going to welcome all of our panelists up to turn their cameras on. Sort of a dramatic, whew. This is so great. It's just some of my favorite women. We are going to get started first with a little icebreaker to, soften the ground before we talk about heavy topics. Senator Batch, let's start with you. What has sparked joy for you over the last year during this pandemic?
I think that the greatest joy I had was when I finally got to, after everyone in our family was vaccinated. I come from a family physician, so we took COVID very seriously. So after everybody's vaccinated, I finally got to, after more than a year, hug my 94-year-old grandmother for the first time 2 weeks ago. So that was what brought me the most joy.
That's amazing. Congresswoman?
One of the favorite joys of COVID was joining a CSA, the Community Supported Agriculture, and getting the shares from the farm every week of these vegetables that I had never necessarily tried. And so now I'm following them along on Instagram as they plant everything, and then we'll be able to go in June and start getting all of our veggies. It just makes me so happy.
Representative?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. So many familiar, awesome faces. This might be a little bit sad, but throughout the pandemic, I've been trying to do a little more self-care and watching some really awesome Netflix series. And so both Schitt's Creek and The Good Place have given me a lot of joy this past year, and just always reflecting on some of those creative, funny moments gives me a lot of joy throughout the day, especially in the legislature in Florida, where every day is a fight.
And finally, Cecile.
I have to be obvious, but since no one else said it, it was crying the day of the inauguration, watching Joe Biden, but just frankly, more importantly to me, Kamala Harris become the first woman vice president of the United States of America. I just feel like that's a kind of like core joy that has helped just set this year on the right path.
Amazing. That starts us on such a high note. And so I'm immediately going to veer us into like a real downer. I want to start by talking about the state legislative landscape, and particularly around Roe v. Wade and abortion access. Because one of the things that we've seen over the last year is the Republican Party has gone full force into passing or presenting more than 300 anti-abortion provisions in 43 states. It's the highest number of anti-abortion laws we've seen in a decade. And if even some of them pass, and some of them have, it's really dangerous for women in these places. Cecile, I want to start with you as your experience combating these laws over the last decade or more. What is going on here? Where is this coming from? And what does the forecast look like for abortion access in some of these places?
Well, I mean, this is not a new trend, even though, and I wouldn't measure it by numbers. I guess I would measure it by impact. And because a lot of these bills, I mean, like my home state of Texas, we're kind of running out of ways to restrict abortion. But obviously I think it really demonstrates what a stranglehold the anti-abortion, anti-choice, wing of the Republican Party has over their party. And it's really sad because when you look at actually polling, support for abortion rights really has never been higher. It's the highest it's been since Roe versus Wade was decided. And I think in large part that was because people they saw in the last administration, these efforts and successful efforts in many ways to restrict access to all kinds of reproductive health care. I mean, and it's not just abortion, as you know, it is access to all kinds of family planning and birth control and sex education. And Bill Anna could, write a tome about all the ways, in fact, that reproductive rights and healthcare access has been restricted just in the state of Florida. I think the most important thing that we can do, well, one is it does make a big difference, and we may talk about the difference it's made just to have an administration and now have Health and Human Services run by a new group of people who actually believe in public health and believe that reproductive health care is part of public health. It's so great to have champions like Congresswoman Underwood raising the issues of maternal health care, and particularly for Black women in this country that has been really just not talked about for too long. So there are a lot of things that I think are positive that we can do, but ultimately we have to do what you're doing. Honestly, Amanda, we got to elect more folks at the local level because we cannot change things until we have more women, more people of color, more young people in state legislatures who can turn the tide. And so I'm excited to be on this panel because we have really good examples of those leaders with us here tonight.
Representative Eskamani, can you talk a little bit about your perspective from Florida's state legislature?
I can. I mean, first of all, Cecile Richards is like one of my role models always, and has been a constant source of support, inspiration for me. And being a PP alum, these issues are near and dear to my heart because you work with patients and you really see the impact of these horrific, oppressive policies and their impact on people's lives. I will never forget when Florida passed a 24-hour mandatory wait period for accessing abortion, how that bill was signed to law, a lawsuit was filed, so there was a stay. The stay was appealed, and within less than 24 hours, the bill was back into play. And we were providing abortion services at our Kissimmee Health Center that next day, and patients were just so distraught and upset because they were being told that they could no longer continue with the procedure today. They had to come back. And you think about just the travel barriers, the cost barriers, the childcare barriers, folks who drove hours to come to us in a state like Florida. So you really you see that firsthand perspective of how when these terrible policies are debated, it's already very shame invoking, but then their implementation is even worse. And so right now in Florida, we actually have several anti-abortion bills filed, but only one has moved. And that's one of the reason bans that we've seen in other parts of the country as well. It's going to be heard on the House this week, actually. And to give folks some insider perspective, myself and 3 other Democrats have filed amendments on this bill that's specifically targeting what is a non-medical term of disability abortion. And one of the amendments that I'm filing is saying that this bill cannot be implemented until you eliminate the 20,000 wait lists that we have for disability services in Florida. Because again, the irony is that they want to go after and stigmatize and shame those who end a pregnancy. And yet they completely don't value life right now in Florida, where we have over 20,000 people on a disability wait list. So we always are trying to also kind of call out the hypocrisy of these bills and allow them to feel the shame they're trying to force on women who make, or on people who make the decision to end a pregnancy. But I'll just add too that some of our proactive efforts have been in really inspiring lawmakers to be brave on these subjects, to be abortion out loud. And it's been really, really exciting to see our freshman class, as I'm now a sophomore, want to talk about abortion proactively, want to protect access to an abortion, and look at the intersectionality of how that impacts specifically people of color. And so I'm really proud of those efforts to encourage more folks to share their personal stories and to try to break the shame that surrounds abortion.
And Senator Batch, there's some anti-abortion legislation sort of meandering its way through the North Carolina state legislature as well. What's the view like from there?
Yeah, so I think that in general, right, we're seeing the same stuff that we saw, frankly, filed in 2018 and 2019, and then other versions that are even worse than what they had, what they filed. They're moving through the same Born Alive bill that they moved through almost every single legislature. And I think for North Carolina, outside of what we all know is really important, which is continuing to elect people that actually believe in reproductive freedoms and rights, we also have to hold the line for those who are already there. So sometimes the best that we can do, unfortunately, in North Carolina, is just to be able to stand there and actually sustain the vetoes from our governor. We're fortunate to have a Democratic governor who, of course, is a huge supporter of reproductive rights. And so last year, it came to the fact that, you know, a lot of the bad legislation passed, including the Born Alive bill, that they were touting. They filed that same bill. It's going to be moving through both chambers, and we're just going to have to go ahead and sustain the veto. So I think as we are trying to figure out who we want to elect in places where, frankly, you know, Anna and I are in districts, and or not districts, but in the areas of the country that are still very Republican controlled, right? We have to just continue to push forward, but we also have to hold the line to make sure that we're standing up for all of the other women who are in that space, who are depending on us to show up every single day to just make sure that we can go ahead and ensure that they have the same access to abortion and reproductive rights that they would otherwise not have had we not been elected and had we not been able to hold the line.
I think Senator and Representative, both of you point to the importance of, even if we're in the minority, it matters how big that minority is, because it gives you some leverage to push back on some of the worst stuff making its way through the Republican majorities. Congressman, what's happening on the federal level to try and at least support these women in the states?
Well, you know, we've been, this is the beginning of a new Congress. And so what that means is some of the progress that we made in the last Congress, because it wasn't signed into law, we have to start over. And so a lot of that preparatory work is happening. And I know that there's strong legislation like WIPA, the Women's Health Protection Act, that really directly is seeking to address this issue. And I'm a supporter of that bill this year, which is very exciting. We had to make a small adjustment, but you should stay tuned for that. We have a new chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. I serve on Appropriations, and Chairwoman DeLauro is committed to ending Hyde. And so that, I think, will be the most significant change in the reproductive healthcare space to come out of the House, probably in, is it an overstatement to say decades, Cecile? I don't think so. I think this is like very, very significant. And so I'm very pleased to be able to support this endeavor and through a lens of equity and ending disparities and making sure that everyone has access to reproductive health care.
I want to remind folks, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, do drop them in the Q&A and we'll bubble them up. Congressman, I want to stick with you because another thing that you've been focusing on in Congress is, as a co-founder and co-chair of the Black Maternal Health Caucus, you've been really leading the work to try and end the nation's maternal mortality crisis, especially among Black women who are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from complications during pregnancy. I'm wondering, what has surprised you most during the work on this issue? What has sort of blown your mind the most?
Well, I think that a lot of people believe that the Congress considers the most important, most pressing issues facing our country. That's just not true. The Congress considers the issues that the members raise. And so when we're talking about this issue where we've had a disparity where Black birthing people are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related complication than their white counterparts, and this has been around my entire lifetime, and I'm 34 years old, and we've not seen federal action, and certainly not in a comprehensive way to address this issue, it's not because the solutions didn't exist. It's not because there wasn't widespread agreement even on what to do. It's because we didn't have the people in the Congress that wanted to take this on and make it a priority. This is why representation matters. And I am so excited that we've been able to so quickly build such a diverse coalition. And I mean it, regional diversity, age diversity, religion, background, gender. We are seeing interesting movement happening in the Senate as well, which is usually like not the narrative that we've been hearing coming out of Capitol Hill, right? And so I'm really optimistic that we're going to see some bills signed into law this year. We've already had an early win with the American Rescue Plan. This most recent COVID relief law included a postpartum Medicaid expansion, the first Medicaid expansion since the ACA. And now folks that are on Medicaid will be able to get a full year of coverage. Well, their states need to implement it, but there's a pathway to do that, which will save lives, right? And that's what we're here to do. That's a policy that has broad support. Even like the most conservative Republicans understand why moms need healthcare coverage, right? And like, it's just a new day, and I'm so excited about this moment.
Senator Batch, you in particular have a very personal relationship with access to healthcare for Black women specifically. You survived breast cancer, which is more likely to affect Black women than white women. You've used your story and your passion to really inform your approach to this legislation. What does that conversation look like when you bring your personal story to this, and what more can state legislators be doing to advocate for more healthcare access, especially for Black women and women of color?
Yeah, so when you have your own personal stories, right, and your own experiences, and we all know people that every day struggle with this, right? So as a Black woman, because I had access to healthcare, because I'm self-employed and I prioritize making sure that I have health insurance and pay 100% of the premiums for my employees, I also had a really great health plan that I could go and get diagnosed early. I also have a history of breast cancer in my family, but so many individuals completely forget about the fact that even if you have access, doesn't mean that you have time to take off from your job, right? Doesn't mean that even if you did get treatment, that you could actually afford it with the copays and with some of the junk policies that are out there. And then you're asking people to take time off from work when some people are living paycheck to paycheck, 2 or 3 jobs, right? So we have to deal with equity as a whole. We can't just look at healthcare as the only solution. We have to look at all these other elements. And so, I am so in awe that Congresswoman Underwood went ahead and did the Black maternal, momnibus bill, right? And we looked at that, and Congresswoman Adams is one of the congresswomen from North Carolina, and I've worked with her on the paid family leave bill, and I came and testified in the committee last year with regards to expanding paid leave, because I had the benefit, of course, working for myself. It wasn't paid leave, but I couldn't get fired from my job. So when we talk about all these elements, you have the congresswoman who's putting legislation out there and saying we should do all of this. And then we took the work that they both did, and we have a momnibus for North Carolina. And now there's a momnibus in California, right? You take great ideas from all across the country and you say, if the feds are doing it, but we also need to make sure that we're taking care of our own constituents at the state level, right? So we have actually promoted those ideas and are hoping that we can move parts of it, including the fact that we now have Republicans who have sponsored a bill to go ahead and expand Medicaid. We don't have Medicaid expansion in North Carolina, but they're willing to expand Medicaid 12 months postpartum, right? So that's the progress that is happening. While it's not big enough, you can't tell me that all the millions of women in North Carolina that can actually stay on their health insurance isn't going to make a huge difference for that time frame. And so I think it's really amazing when we look at it, from the federal level all the way down to the states, how we can work in tandem to make sure that there's not a single person that falls through the cracks, because we're all doing our part to make sure that every single person in America can get the treatment that they need.
Anna, I know Representative, I know you're talking about this in the chat a little bit, but your experience in Florida is remarkably similar. Can you tell us?
Right. I was just listening to Senator Batch and I was like, wow, it's the same, very similar conversation in Florida. Now, of course, we keep pushing for Medicaid expansion, and with the American Rescue Plan, it's even more foolish not to. But unfortunately, in states like Florida, North Carolina, and others, we still haven't made that policy decision. And it's been a decade now of folks in the coverage gap. And we work really closely with our navigators as well. And thankfully, with the Biden administration, I think they're going to be reprioritized. And they've been incredibly helpful throughout the pandemic because many of our constituents lost their jobs. And as a result, they lost their employer health insurance and had to turn towards other means or turn towards having no insurance. So it's been, I think the pandemic has really amplified the disparities that everyone here already experienced, already knew about. And it kind of just brought it front and center. But to also echo some of the points that Senator Batch made, one of the successes we've had this year is getting the Republican caucus to commit to the importance of postpartum care, specifically in extending what is currently a 60-day access to Medicaid post-birth and making that a full year. And of course, the Biden administration's American Rescue Plan makes that even more possible because states don't have to apply for a waiver. States can just say, we're going to do it and receive the dollars for it. Unfortunately, the Senate hasn't bought into it yet. The House is, so it's one of the budget issues we're facing right now. But it would be a game changer for our state to do that. And I have to keep stressing because it was really frustrating. Our Speaker of the House is a white man. And when he spoke about this topic, I kid you not, he acted like it was the first time he's ever heard of maternal mortality rates. I mean, it was shocking, especially for a woman of color, because we're like, really, dude? Like, you just learned about it? And so when I had my one-on-one with him early on during session, I really pushed him on prioritizing the voices of Black women in our caucus to be a leader in rolling out this plan. Because again, I don't want to see initiatives co-opted, especially from Black women who have been leading the charge on this topic for generations. And so fortunately, he heeded that advice. And we do have members of the Democratic caucus, Black women, who are really championing the issue alongside the Republican members and getting this done. And I'm very hopeful it will happen. But we have a lot of work to do in Florida. One of the other initiatives we're pursuing right now, to echo Senator Batch as well, is we want to host a workshop focused on parental leave, paid parental leave. And it's one of the committees that I'm ranking member in, and working with one of our freshman members, Angie Nixon, who is another strong Black freshman, a Black mother. And she was pregnant on the campaign trail. I mean, she had COVID while she was pregnant. She brings so many of her lived experiences to the forefront. So we're working alongside her to try to at least have the workshop in Florida and to build bipartisan support around parental paid leave.
Senator Batch and Representative Eskamani both hit on something really important, which is that women's healthcare is an economic issue. It is not just about like going to be able to see the doctor. It is expansive across so many different facets of policy. And I want to throw this out to any of you, and unmute whoever wants to speak first. What is the policy or issue area that most people may not think of as women's health that we should think about as part of this conversation? Like, what are we not talking about?
I mean, well, I'll just say this, and then I'll let them. I mean, these are the experts because they're on the front lines of it. I think that none of women's health has ever been talked about, and that's why it's just actually, Congresswoman Underwood, hearing you speak just makes it's like night and day in some ways. As you think of now, I think we have 103 women in the Democratic caucus, 44 women of color. This is like a sea change, and as she said, it's well, some of these issues are just issues that literally people have never thought about, like Anna said, Representative Eskamani said, because these are things where, like, I can remember, lobbying with Planned Parenthood going to the Hill, and like we were talking to members who like have no idea what's going on with reproductive systems, right? So just the thought that there is now representation, and these are conversations that can immediately be held by people who actually understand what we're talking about it's a revolutionary change. And I want to really underscore too something else that Congresswoman Underwood said, which is, it's not that these issues haven't mattered to people in Congress, but we haven't built the political will and throw weight to demand that something happen. And so I just think there's no way to overemphasize that all of the progress we saw in the American Rescue Plan and what we're seeing now proposed in an infrastructure bill that is not just about roads and bridges, it is literally about caregivers, it's about home care workers, it's about basic needs that we've all been talking about for years, but never got an ounce of attention. And so I think it's important that we remember how much these women are doing to literally impact just even the conversation that's happening. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I can't wait till I see the day when maternity care and getting pregnant isn't treated like a problem in this country. And people in Congress begin to realize that's how we all got here in the first place. And for God's sake, we need every single pregnant person in this country needs to be able to make their own decisions about what to do about a pregnancy, whether to terminate it or whether to have a child, and know that they are going to be supported by their employer, by their government, to raise a family. And we are just like not there. So I'm glad that the postpartum stuff is beginning to kind of get traction, but we are a long ways from maternity care being seen as fundamental part of our healthcare system.
And when you have 3 million women leave the workforce since this pandemic has started, and we see that we're setting ourselves back generations after we've made some progress, even if it was just incremental, we also see that these women have left. They are still disproportionately low wage workers who have not been rehired, who don't have access to healthcare, who are also the breadwinners for many of their families. And so when you talk about an economic issue, I mean, it's common sense. If you get people healthy, they stay healthy. They're not a drain on society. They can be prosperous and they can work. They can be more productive. Their businesses that they work for make more money. The sweat equity that they put in can then be rewarded by, God forbid, having a healthy, happy employee who can then take care of their families, because we also know that prior to the pandemic, women were, of course, we were seeing a significant increase in regards to wage earners and being head of household, which was completely different from generations back. And so everyone wants to talk about, oh, it's just reproductive rights, but it's the ability for women to actually have access to healthcare and to family planning so they can choose when they want to have a family and if they want to have that. And if we had the ability to actually connect women with healthcare, then so many of the other issues that exist in our society would dissipate, because we could actually be in charge of our own bodies. We would be able to make those decisions, and we would be able to continue to work and support our families without worrying about whether or not we're going to go to work and make everybody sick, or whether or not we actually just have to quit our job so we can stay at home with our kids in a pandemic, because we, of course, have the disproportionate responsibility of taking care of our children, right? So I think that the bigger issue is we, as Cecile said, we continue to say it's about women. It should be about healthcare for people. And then if we got access to everyone for healthcare, then we would see a lot of the underlying issues that continually are systemic generation after generation for women completely dissipate.
The only thing I would add in answer to your question, Amanda, is just we have to remember veterans as part of this conversation. That's one aspect of my work that continues, I think, to surprise folks when I share that, women veterans are the fastest growing segment of our veterans population. And we're talking about a group of people that are across the lifespan, right? We have that early 20-year-old that just separated from active duty service to the cadet nurse corps member who served in World War II. And they're all getting care in an institution that was not meant for them. And, inconsistently offers care, period. But when we talk about reproductive health care, right, they just rather outsource it by and large than find a way to provide it at a high quality level across the country. And I think that at the federal level, we talk about, single payer and universal and all these different changes that we might want to make to our healthcare system when we operate a healthcare system right now, right, which is the VA. And there's so many opportunities for improvement there that folks just don't often think about or remember. And so we're having a lot of fun bringing some changes and reforms and some ideas to the VA.
I love that, Congresswoman. That's such a great point. And I used to serve on our local Federal Veterans Affairs Committee. And I was one of 2 women in that subcommittee and the only Democratic woman, and oftentimes the only person who would even ask questions about, does the National Guard Armory have lactation rooms or have, restrooms for those who identify as female. I mean, it was just so wild to me how the confusion of these questions, because nobody has ever asked these questions before. And so I so appreciate you lifting that up. The other point I'll just add to the space is also, this is going to sound super nerdy, but tax policy. So I serve on Ways and Means in the Florida Legislature, and I'm the ranking member this session. And candidly, I did not want to be in Ways and Means. I didn't ask for it. But once I got there, I knew as a freshman, my first year, that I had to get good at it, because at the end of the day, tax policy impacts equity issues and also impacts how much money we have to spend on these services, right? And unfortunately, there are so many parts of tax policy that we all take for granted as normal today that are actually grounded in a racist past. Even sales tax, which all of us, we paid every day, we don't really question it. Sales tax came out of Mississippi after the Great Depression as a means to shift the burden of taxation away from property owners towards those who do not own property, who are mostly Black and brown and poor people. And it is known as a regressive tax, which means those with lower incomes pay more of their annual income to taxation percentage-wise compared to those who have more means. And so when we have to look at tax policy from a gender lens as well, and also think about tax relief systems that benefit women and benefit parents. And Florida is a state without an income tax, which is one reason why people come to Florida. But because we don't have an income tax, we have to find other ways to generate this revenue. So we're very reliant on sales tax. We have a very low corporate income tax rate. And obviously these corporations also don't treat their workers very well at times, including workers who are parents and mothers. So it's a larger system, but I do think it's important that not only do we advocate for the health policy, but think about the economic policies that integrate into the health experiences.
Representative Eskamani, I want to stay with you for a moment, because when we're talking about women's healthcare and healthcare for women and girls, we are of course also talking about trans women and trans girls. And Florida has unfortunately been the epicenter, or one of the many epicenters for bills really doing severe damage to trans women and trans girls. For folks who aren't familiar, can you set some context, and what can we do to protect these girls? What can we do for them?
No, thank you, Amanda. This past week, the Florida House passed House Bill 1475, which is a transphobic piece of legislation that completely bans trans girls from playing in team sports in their schools. And I made the point on the House floor that I refuse to be a pawn in a sick political game that pits me against my sisters and uses women's rights as a tool of drawing lines of division between myself and my sisters, which is exactly what the sponsors try to do. Is they say this is about equity in women's sports, which if you truly cared about equity in women's sports, then you would end the sexual abuse in sports. You'd pay athletes an equal wage. You'd have marketing dollars go towards women's sports as well. So there are some serious issues with women's athletics that have nothing to do with the experiences of trans kids and trans women. And so we fought really aggressively against this bill. We filed 19 amendments on it. We were on the House floor for hours. And one of the most gross parts about this bill is that it also opens up the door for genital inspections, which is just absolutely disgusting, especially in the context of small government just wanting to get into your genitals. I mean, it's just mind-blowing that legislation passed the Florida House. And honestly, it was disappointing how many Republican women consented to it wholeheartedly. The bill was sponsored by a Republican woman. So it also speaks to the fact that anyone can subscribe to white supremacy. Anyone can subscribe to transphobia or anti-women legislation. Doesn't matter what your identity is. You can still cause a lot of harm to people that you are connected to. And it was quite eye-opening for many of us in the process to see folks show their true colors. And so the good news is that the bill looks dead in the Florida Senate. Of course, we're still in legislative session, and we have sine die in 9 days, on April 30th. So we're going to keep ourselves on guard. But I suspect this fight will come back next session, but it just continues to demonstrate how how much misinformation and disinformation is out there around trans lives, and how folks are willing to exploit that to create fear to then harm some of the most vulnerable people in our community.
I want to make sure if anyone has anything else to add from their perspective on this, because it's so sad and infuriating.
Well, I'll just say this is why we passed the Equality Act, because if at the federal level we can affirm everyone's equal civil rights under the law and make sure that we include sexual identity or sexual orientation and gender identity as a protected, explicitly protected class, then these things can't pass, right? And I know that the American people share values, and we just need to urge the Senate to take up this landmark civil rights legislation, because this is so horrifying what we're hearing Representative Eskamani describe.
Yeah, and we've had similar legislation, and also legislation with regards to preventing any type of gender affirming surgeries to trans youth until they're 21, right? So but the great part about what we've seen is that corporations, we had the huge bathroom bill in North Carolina, it was horrible. We lost a lot of business. And so corporations were saying, North Carolina can afford this. The corporations that are there, businesses were actually calling and talking to leadership and saying, we cannot take this. We can't go back to where we were with our terrible bathroom bill. You have to stop it. And then you had advocates from all walks of life inundating us, 400, 500, 600 emails a day about these bills. So that actually got the attention of at least the President Pro Tem in the Senate. And he just came out and said, doesn't matter what the House does, because it was filed in the House or the bills filed in the Senate. He says, we're not going to take these up. We're not going to address them, right? So some of that early advocacy and just constantly staying in your face and putting it out there in public is one of the best ways that we can actually stop some of it from even hitting the floor and having us vote on it. And so that is one of the victories, the good things that we've seen thus far since we started session this year in North Carolina.
And listen, Texas is right up there. So it was just horrifying to see young people having to try to persuade lawmakers not to pass these bills. I think that, though, I guess getting back to your original question, Amanda, about like, why are we seeing 300 bills in state legislatures to restrict abortion, or why are we seeing these just outrageous efforts to take away rights of young people? I think it's because the Republican Party doesn't have anything else to say right now. And so one of the most important things I think all of us can do that are not on the front lines as these women are in office is tell the story about issues that actually people do care about, and the progress that frankly Democrats are making both in Congress and in legislatures, whether it is, getting our shots, be able to see our family and our kids and our grandparents again, whether it is getting a check or extending your unemployment. These are things that actually do matter. And so I know it's such a hard thing because these women are on the front lines having to battle back all this stuff, but this is not what the American people elected them to do, elected the Republican Party to do. And I just think the more and more they are reducing their ability to be in favor of things that actually American people care about. And we just have to, the rest of us out here have to continue to point that out and champion the incredible progress that Democrats are making.
Cecile, that's a really good segue into a question we have from Diana Nichols, who wants to know specifically about what high school students might be able to do right now to help fight for reproductive rights and broader women's health issues. Do you have any advice?
Well, Anna Eskamani is your gal there. When I first met Anna, that was what she was doing, was running around, like getting everything organized for the Planned Parenthood event we were doing. And I was like, I have my eye on you. You are like, this is just your like entry here. No, I mean, Anna, you might want to say it because you were such a great catalyst for young people's engagement in Florida and the kind of programs that Planned Parenthood did there and around the country to bring in a whole new generation of young leaders.
Oh my gosh, I would be honored. And I take a lot of pride because our work as a legislative office has really built off the Planned Parenthood organizing model of carrying folks up the ladder of engagement. And so, we know that there's this incredible pool of supporters, of everyday people who share in our values, but what do we do as organizers and as elected officials to actually carry those folks to become supporters, to become advocates, volunteers, and volunteer leaders, and eventually candidates and folks that work in politics and care about these issues in whatever career path they take. And so, to this question of high school students, I mean, there's so much that every young person can do, but even for high school students, volunteering on local initiatives. I mean, there has to be an abortion rights organization in your neighborhood. It might be a Planned Parenthood affiliate. It might be an abortion fund organization. It might be a reproductive justice organization. But my first thought is just get involved however you can. We have in Florida so many fantastic organizations that are intersectional, that are Black and Brown led, that focus on abortion access. They need volunteers. They need advocates. They need storytellers. And so my first reaction is identify those local groups on the ground to get plugged into. And if you don't find one in your neighborhood, maybe you're in a rural area, for example, then why not start something? Why not start an Instagram page, focused on abortion rights and start following other like-minded pages, reach out to national groups for resources, start that infrastructure from the grassroots up. And I think the other ideal offer is, of course, internships. And I will say for my legislative office, we have a team of 15 to 16 interns every semester, combination of high school students, college students, and grad students. And we have a lot of virtual opportunities now because of the pandemic. We've had students from Kansas intern with us because I met their mom at a conference once. And so we attract a lot of cool folks from across the country, and with the COVID reality for all of our engagements, it actually can open the door for folks who have geographical barriers to still be part of our work. So a few quick ideas, but there's definitely a lot of ways to get involved.
And I'll just tag onto one thing, Anna, that because I love not only bragging on Anna, but one of the newest members of Congress, Nikema Williams, was also a Planned Parenthood advocate, in Georgia. It's just so wonderful to see these women go into office. Sex education in this country is almost non-existent, the vast majority of the country. And so I think to Anna's point, if there's not an organization where you are in your high school, there needs to be, and it's an easy thing to start. It's an easy thing to get resources from, if it's not Planned Parenthood, other organizations. But that early experience in high school of advocating for yourself and advocating for your peers to get the kind of education and information that you need is incredibly powerful. And there's nothing better than taking on your school board to really right, Anna? Kind of get your organizing chops started. So.
Absolutely. And what a good reminder that obviously for tonight, we have a member of Congress, we have a state senator, a state house rep, but don't forget those local government officials too. It's such a great point. I mean, school board members dictate so much of this policy. City council members could even look at resolutions that are abortion out loud, or look at policies that ensure that their public employees have access to an abortion with their insurance plan. So there's a lot of good local campaigns that you could even be a part of, or young people could help lead.
If I could just jump in real quick, the other thing is high school students actually have some unique expertise, particularly in the area of some of the cyber exploitation that many of our elected officials just do not have the fluency in these issues, are not familiar with how they might manifest. And if you wanted to be involved in that side of this, I think that many would welcome your engagement, and you could create a safe space for them to ask all the questions that they feel uncomfortable even acknowledging in public, because this is kind of the next area when we talk about VAWA and violence against women, and ways that we need to modernize some of the legal framework, because these types of crimes are so common. And our current legal apparatus hasn't caught up yet.
Congresswoman, you segue really well into my next question, and sort of one of my last. One of the problems with many of these issues is that talking about women's health and women's bodily autonomy is so stigmatized, and it feels like such a sticky conversation to have in a public space without it very quickly either veering off the rails, or without the people having that conversation being the recipients of some like really aggressive harassment. I'm wondering if any of you have suggestions for what normal people can do to help destigmatize this conversation and have it in a way that is productive.
Well,
please. No, go ahead, Congresswoman. Okay. See, this is when you have women together. We're also collaborative. We're like, no, you go, no, you go. What I will say is that you got to meet people where they are. When you're in a state in North Carolina where, we're still in the Bible Belt, and a whole lot of people have very strong feelings. One of the things that I've had, and I've made interesting bedfellows with one of the senators in the Republican Party here, is that he said, Sydney, you and I aren't going to agree on abortion, right? We're not going to agree on that. But I want to reduce abortions in North Carolina by 50%. And I said, well, so do I. People don't want people to have abortions. It's not like we're going out there and saying, hey, everyone go get one. We believe in access. I said, but the way that we actually address that, we go ahead and we increase funding to LARC devices, right? If we can actually increase funding to long-acting reversible contraception, and we can give family planning to people, and we give them access to healthcare, then you will put women in the driver's seat as to when they choose to go ahead and have children. I said, so if you want to meet that goal, I want to help you. You need to give me more money for family planning. You need to make sure that women can have healthcare past the time in which they actually get cut off at 2 months, like Anna said with regards to Florida. And so we've been able to say, we're never going to agree on these issues, but what we can agree on is making sure that women have access and they can actually decide what they want to do with their bodies. And part of that is making sure that they have the liberty and the ability to be able to have the choice to have birth control. And so that is some of the conversations that, unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of living in a very blue state. And frankly, living in part of the state that is very blue. So we have to actually just work with where people are and figure out how we can finally get them to meet us at a point where we can negotiate on anything that is better. And so if I see it as a win, if I can get more access to women who do not have access right now to family planning.
I was just going to say, sorry, I have a candle that is having a problem. I was just going to say that it's important also to tell our stories. People cannot deny the humanity that we all bring to this process. And the reason that so much of the bullying happens is because our voices are so powerful, that people are seeking to beat us down and shut us up and make us go away because we are so compelling. Our voices are so strong, and that we can break down barriers that they try so desperately to put up in our place and on our path. And so what I would encourage people to do is, if you're entering this space, take a look at your own life and determine what you are comfortable with sharing publicly, and make sure that you practice telling your story, get it down, be as sincere and genuine as you can in your advocacy. And recognize that the attacks are going to come. They're going to be vicious. They're going to be mean, and they may threaten violence. I'm not saying that that's okay, but you can prepare for those things. But what we shouldn't do is decide to opt out just because these obstacles are in place. And know that you have a whole lot of people around the country that have your back. You are not in this alone. And it's our honor, really, to be able to support you and fight for all of our rights from these positions that we hold.
I just have to say how much I love that, Congresswoman, because I think that's, people used to always come up to me when I was at Planned Parenthood and say oh my God, how are you doing? And you must get all this, terrible things said. And, I would say to every nasty person, there were 99 people who would stop me and say, thank goodness for what you all do. Planned Parenthood saved my life, and the stories would come. And that is, I think that is that basic humanity is something that's very easy to focus on your detractors and forget about the millions of people who just are so grateful that you all are where you are doing what you do.
My last question for you all and hopefully we can answer this relatively briefly. So much of the last year has been terrible. Most of the last year has been really terrible. And I'm wondering if you could answer, what is the thing that you've learned that we hope we carry forward, whether it relates to women's health or just general living? What do you hope we carry forward from this? Representative, can we start with you? We'll just work our way up.
Sure, and thank you again for bringing us together to have this really important dialogue. That there are ways to stay connected even when you're apart, I think is probably one of my biggest takeaways from this past year. And my team in particular, myself, we pride ourselves in being a very accessible office and showing up in every community event and meeting folks belly to belly. It's just one of our signature values, is that like we meet eye to eye and we're going to have conversations. We're not going to avoid tough courageous conversations. But of course, with the pandemic, when everyone's having to socially distance, it's so hard to find that same energy. And we found ways to replicate it online and to not only maintain our relationship with our constituents, but actually expand it, overwhelmingly expand it statewide. And so it's important that you're intentional about that, to stay connected even when you are physically apart, and to continue building power in that way. So don't slow down in those efforts. Find different ways to do it, but don't slow down. Because if we do allow ourselves to get disconnected, then it's much easier to divide us and to put barriers in our way of achieving these collective goals.
Senator?
I would say that, the silver lining of, frankly, COVID is that when everybody was home and all they could do is watch TV at a time in which our country needed to step up and do something with, George Floyd's murder, people came out. Even with COVID, everything that happened, humanity showed up. And when we needed people to show up and to protest in streets with masks on, to say we matter, like Black Lives Matter, every single person, we need to address all of these systemic issues with regards to racism, with regards to, policing in America. The list goes on. People finally found their voices and they were able to elevate those voices and really put that into action. And I hope that we don't lose that, because I think that one of the driving and galvanizing forces through this year was that people were at home. What else are you doing? You were looking at the television. All of us were tuned in. We were not going to work every single day. People were just trying to figure out, what is happening. And they were finally able to see without, any doubt and question that we have issues in America, and that it was very reassuring as a Black person in America to finally see so many allies, right? So many white allies step up and be in that same space. And I transition that to where we are with reproductive health, right? We have so many of these bills year after year after year doing it. But like Cecile said at the very beginning of this conversation, access to abortion is one of the most popular, like overwhelmingly popular. People don't want to talk about it because it's stigmatized, which is the reason why we should talk about it and the importance of access. But ultimately, that's where we are. And I feel like we should take those same voices and all of the energy that we've had, and people need to show up with their humanity in an authentic way so that we can continue to make progress in all the ways that will help all Americans.
Congresswoman?
What I'm taking away is this concept of being all in it together. And I think that that's what also makes Run for Something so important and so powerful, because when you're running for local office, it may feel like it just has local impact, but it's not true. We are all so interconnected. When I hear Representative Eskamani describe these awful bills that they're considering in Florida, I think about that child who was afraid, literally afraid for their life, and know that that has a rippling impact across this country. And so, I'm excited about, where we can go as a country when we recognize how interconnected we truly are and how we have shared success. And I think that, tremendous change is on the horizon.
I'll just say I'm really grateful what everyone said, and Senator Batch, I couldn't agree with you more that I suppose one of the most hopeful days of any of our last, this last year was the verdict yesterday, and just feeling like there was like a small opening. I was thinking that there is Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America, has this great line, which is that the world only spins forward. And I think that despite all the really hard things that we're talking about and all the hard things we can do, I actually think that's right. And that we have the most diverse Congress ever, and I don't see it going backwards. We have more young people, more people of color, more women not waiting their turn. I mean, Lauren Underwood is my favorite example of just like, don't wait to be asked, just get in there. And that is the spirit of run for something. Like, this is the only life we have, so do it now. And that is a really, to me, incredibly hopeful thing that's happened in this last year.
Cecile, Senator Batch, Congresswoman, Representative Eskamani, thank you so much for joining us tonight for this, really, I was surprised at how hopeful of a conversation it was. Thank you for being part of the Run for Something community, and for being so generous with your time and your support for us. It means so much to our team. Thank you to Mary, our ASL interpreter. Thank you to our host committee and to the Run for Something staff who helped put together tonight's event. I said I'd only ask you one more time, but here it is. If you are inspired, if you're fired up, if you are ready to take the next step with Run for Something, please do make another donation. runforsomething.net/build is where to go. We will drop that in the chat, as well as email you tomorrow. You will get also information on all of our speakers this evening and how you can learn more about what they're up to and follow along with their work. There is one more Run for Something front row seat event tomorrow night. It's a really good conversation. The speakers will be announced at 10 a.m. in the morning, so keep an eye on your inbox and on our social media. It is going to be just as good as this one. Maybe can't top it. I don't know. This one may be my favorite so far, but it's going to be just as good. Thank you again to all the amazing women and everyone who joined us tonight. Have a good night, everybody.